Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar titled WIOA Services Matrix, Title 1B Adult and Dislocated Worker Services. This is part 1 of 2. So we can put the registration link for part 2 in the chat towards the end of the session here. I'll put a plug in for that. Welcome, Peoria office. Thank you for letting us know you're all together. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. So my name is Kirsten Bayer, and I am with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University, and I will be your moderator and technical support for today's session. Here's my email, so feel free to reach out to me via email, or you can use the Zoom chat today and chat me directly if you have any technology issues or have any follow-up questions following the session. Today's webinar is going to be recorded, and we will have it up on our website and on Illinois WorkNet within about 24 hours. So that way, if you need to send it out to your team to watch prior to Thursday's part 2 session, you can do so. We do have closed captioning on as well for accessibility reasons, so feel free to turn those on, whether you need it for accessibility or for note-taking purposes. We are on Zoom meeting today, not Zoom webinar. So you do have the ability to turn on your cameras or unmute. We're going to ask that you refrain from doing so until prompted for any kind of Q&A. And then if you have any questions or comments or concerns during the webinar, please feel free to type those in the chat, and myself and the rest of the presenters will address those either by responding to you via chat or answering the question live. And then for the presentations, we do apologize. It was sent out late this afternoon, but we did send out the presentation via email to everyone on the registration list. And then also I'm putting it in the chat right now. So it is a PDF and you should be able to download it via the chat. So feel free to access it there. I will also put it on our website and put that website in the chat here momentarily. I think that's all the housekeeping items I have today. We do have I think I mentioned everything. So if you could go ahead and actually put where is your local area in the chat where you're joining us from today. We were supposed to have a poll, but it's not working for me right now, so I apologize for that. So feel free to put your local area, put your LWIA, or you can just put your local area. So we appreciate that participation. Thank you very much. We have lots of LWIA 10, 17, 11, 26, 5, 14, 4, 15, LWIA 1, LWIA 22, 11, lots of LWIA 4s, LWIA 24s. Thank you for participating. We appreciate that, and we will keep that for our records and for our analytics. Okay, and now I think I'm going to hand it off to Paula. Feel free to continue using the chat function throughout the webinar, and we will be on for any technical difficulties. Thank you.
Thanks, Kirsten. It's Mark, actually. Mark, we're just going to get us going here. Appreciate your introduction there, Kirsten, and thank everyone for joining us. It looks like we got a clear message last week with our overview that LWIA 7 has their own session tomorrow. I'm not seeing any LWIA 7s come through as identified in the chat, so appreciate that. If someone is from LWIA 7, you're more than welcome to join us today, but you do want to check with your help desk or your administrator for information on the specific sessions occurring around the Career Connect system and the local area 7 services. So again, feel free to stay with us, but you may want to use your time in a different way and join them tomorrow, I think, is their first session. Really welcome everyone back. Hopefully you all were able to either participate live in last Thursday's overview session of the services matrix. We gave a lot of background to how we got to where we're at going into today, where we're going to really be giving you the details of the matrix, giving you the real beef and meat of it. We've got Paula Berry from our performance office and Laura Don from our policy unit, who have been working for months on end to get the matrix to where we can present it, and closing in on actual deployment dates. We'll talk about those later today. So we'll be turning it over to Paul and Laura here in a few slides. Really want to thank all of you again for joining last week or viewing the recorded session. We got a lot of really excited responses from people. Thought it was a very well thought out from what they could see so far. Obviously, we haven't shared the actual matrix itself. You're gonna see some of that today. So going to our objectives today, you're gonna see what it looks like. You're gonna see Paula and Laura going through elements of the matrix. Today, we're going to be focusing on adult and dislocated worker career services. We'll jump to the remaining training, supportive, and follow-up services on Thursday. So as Kirsten said, this is a part 1 of 2, so you'll want to make sure you join us on Thursday, or go to the recorded session before next week when we do the deployment. You'll want to have all that information at your hand when we share the matrix and we go live with all the changes. As we go through this, we're going to give you a lot of definitions. We talked about that last week, that we want to provide some consistency in our reporting and accuracy in reporting the services that our participants are receiving. We want you as career planners, case managers, coaches, and as administrators as well, to be selecting the appropriate services so that we can track them more thoroughly, do some better analysis because we have that accuracy, be transparent to our Department of Labor partners federally in what we are utilizing our funding for. And so we'll go through all of those services. Some of them have changed, so you'll want to be mindful of that, so that when the services go live in the system, you see and understand what the new titles are. We want to also, as we go through this, we're going to be giving you some kind of descriptions of how you can use the matrix in your everyday kind of world of activities, in both serving your participants and recording those activities. So we've got a lot of Q&A, we've got a lot of application of the information, and we're going to do those demonstrations. So you'll see it kind of live when Paula and Laura are talking about that. So we want you to make sure you're familiar with all these elements, so that as we go through, those type of questions are kind of in the background and already answered. But certainly if you have any questions as we go through today and future webinars, place them in the chat. We'll be doing our best to respond to them in the chat, or we might even have that information already ready to present to you in our presentation. As we know from adult dislocated worker services, we want to make sure we're developing an accurate and thorough individual employment plan. That's okay, Paula. And so we're gonna tie a lot of this into the tracking through that IEP, and we've got additional aids in the matrix. One of those are performance reporting, so all of you understand how the service is being provided tie to any of the 5 indicators of performance in each of the 2 programs, or if they don't tie at all. So we'll be showing you that, as well as some financial fiscal elements. The matrix has several elements to it. It's structured with the adult dislocated worker career and training services outlined. Those are what we're going to start covering today, as I mentioned, and finish those on Thursday. We'll be wrapping in the supportive services, follow-up, and work-based learning on our Thursday session. And then in a couple of weeks, on February 28th and March 2nd, we'll be doing all of the youth program elements. So if you're primarily a youth career planner, I think you'll get a lot out of this session and Thursday's session, but certainly join us in a couple of weeks when we're going to talk specific to those services. We do actually also have a couple tabs focused on some of our additional grants that we utilize, additional WIOA funding. And so you'll see that on Thursday as well, including the the disaster workforce grants, national disaster workforce grants. So for those of you, we mentioned on Thursday last week, those of you who work in the world of reporting and monitoring, you'll want to know the Pearl elements. You'll want to know some of the fields and some of these service codes. You see them on this kind of screen capture here at the bottom right, but those will not be visible to all of you when we send out the matrix. They'll be hidden fields because in most of our daily activities, we don't need to know those codes and terms. So just be mindful of that. If you see the matrix and you really need to understand those codes, you'll be able to hide those columns and utilize them appropriately. We have 7 tabs out there. You see those all here kind of stacked upon each other. The first one is what we're going to cover today, and then the majority of the others we'll cover later this week. We have service types and definitions, as I mentioned. And then here again are those standardized categories that you'll be seeing across the bottom tabs, as well as some of those are embedded within other tabs, such as supportive services are tied into the youth, work-based learning are tied into training opportunities. So we want you to make sure you see those in each of the spaces so you can better, more efficiently utilize this tool. And finally, categorization, just kind of get us started before I turn it over to Paula. We'll be talking about both career and individualized career services. Very important to understand where one starts and ends and the other one picks up, because there's a unique differences there. And for reporting purposes, again, we want to be accurate. As a reminder from last week, we will not be talking about those self-services where staff involvement is minimal, if at all. Those are not included in the matrix. These are all about services that either prompt or occur after enrollment. So you won't see that in this list here. You don't see that in this list, and you won't see it on any of those tabs. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Paula, and we'll jump right into this, and hope you are able to easily follow along with our discussion. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Mark. It's actually Laura, but that.
Oh, okay. All right.
As Mark was saying, there are 5 categories of services that are outlined in the service matrix. And by creating this comprehensive list of the allowable services and options, we provide the definitions. And we're doing this so we're all speaking from the same dictionary. And we're able to provide a consistent message to all of those that we work with. And we make sure that we have established some clear definitions, which should make sure that these services are applied consistently across the state. And so each of these categories do have different rules and relationships, and we will discuss those over this and the next section, which is just strictly on adult and dislocated worker services. Those were the categories of services. That these are 3 general types of services. We have enrollment services. Those services trigger participation, and they extend the 90-day rule on the exit window because they are participating services. Each additional service that's added, or an episode, which we'll talk about later on number 3, will begin a new 90-day window. And there is a column on the matrix, which we will show you, that says triggers participation, extends 90-day exit window, enrolled service, and it's a yes or no on that column. So it shall be easy for you to figure out, does this service trigger enrollment? And again, like Mark said, most of the services on the matrix are enrollment services, but there are a couple of non-enrollment activities that we want to point out, and that's this next section here. This non-enrollment activities are those that do not trigger participation or extend the exit date. They're mainly a mechanism for us to capture what's happening with the participant. The last type of service is what we have deemed the same-day service. These are specific to Illinois. You won't find same-day service in WIOA at all. We've done this as a mechanism to streamline the services in the MIS system and to eliminate these types of services for remaining open for an extended period of time when they really shouldn't be. These services are typically completed in one day, and therefore the service or activity starts and ends on that same day in the system, so it cannot be left open. They can be provided on one or more days, but each occurrence of that service is considered another episode of the same service, and it is entered as such. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. Jim Potts from the Department of Commerce's Office of Employment and Training provides an in-depth PowerPoint on the entry of same-day services into IWDS. So if you're looking for that, that might be a reference that we can provide to you. All of the services have relationships to performance measures. Each one of every time an individual gets a service, it is going to be tied to a performance measure and outcome. There is a column that's listed in each one of the tabs that indicates if the service will be counted in the measure, in the denominator, and outcomes, and are reported to the Department of Labor. Whether it's a career service or training service, those relate to certain measures, and you'll see those as we show you those tabs today and Thursday. There's also a column that talks about the minimum training expenditure requirement, which is an Illinois Workforce Innovation Board requirement that 50% of the local area's funds be expended on training. And so we do have a column in the matrix that talks about, does this particular service count towards that minimum training expenditure requirement? So that's very helpful to the local area's fiscal staff. And please note that some of these rules apply to the definitions, the documentations, and reporting. So services have several rules. Allowable services have a definition found in policy or federal guidance. A lot of these were found in technical or in training, employment, and guidance letters from the Department of Labor. Some services may require specific supporting documentation in the individual employment plan and the IEP. We want to make sure that all services are reported timely and accurately in the MIS as they occur, so that we have the data integrity and accurate tracking of participant services and the full accountability of the program. And these services must be entered into the MIS to be tracked to reflect work being done and provide a clear picture of customer engagement all the way through exit and follow-up services. Now, there's a couple of MIS service entry general rules. We say MIS as a generic term. For us, that is IWDS. MIS is Management Information System. But to ensure that we're comprehensive and whichever group we're talking to, we have used the term MIS. So just so you are aware of that. We especially don't want local staff to put actual services that are listed in the matrix that you need to get credit for under the career planning / case management service. That is a new name. It used to be called case management. It is now called career planning case management. I believe that change has already been made in the system, but we want to make sure that all of the services, all of the allowable services are actually being accounted for, and they're not put into the career planning service and entered into the case node. You want to document every service in the MIS within 10 days of it being provided, and that's required by the career planning policy. You want to ensure that all the services provided are outlined in the individual employment plan. You want to make sure that services, the services screen will list all the service provided. So that anyone that's looking at this client can easily see what services been provided. And that's a big reason why we created the same day service rules. So we can show that later. Case notes and episodes are used to tell the story about the service. And there's no required sequence or order for adult and dislocated worker services. So we're going to do a little bit of a demo here. Thank you, Paula. And this is just going to be a quick first look at what the service matrix looks like. So it provides all the types and relationships, the rules for these services. And this was built to lay out this in an easy to read and understand view for everyone. You just need to know a few terms and where to look to find these. The matrix contains the allowable enrolled services, activities, the definition, the related performance measures, fiscal information, such as whether it counts towards the minimum training expenditure requirements, if the service is a same day service, and whether the service triggers enrollment or extends the 90-day exit rule. So right now we're kind of look through this. This is the tab that we're going to talk about today, is the staff assisted and individualized career services, and that's on this first tab in the matrix. Each tab beyond that is going to is for each one of the services outlined here. So there's going to be a tab strictly for adult and dislocated worker training services, a tab for youth, a tab for supportive services, a tab for follow-up, and a tab on work-based learning, which is for it's a reference tab, and then the disaster recovery DRE tab, which is specifically for those disaster relief grants. But back to this tab that we're going to cover today is the adult and dislocated worker staff assisted and individualized career services. So here you can tell on this row 5 here that the basic career services, staff assisted, are listed first. It lists the category of the service from the Pearl element or from the Teagle, which is the Teagle 1016 change 2, attachment 7, table A. And that provides the participant level services chart for adults and dislocated workers and youth as well. So a lot of that we've pulled straight out of there. And then we provide the definition of the service and what all is entailed in this service. We talk about the performance measures that once this individual is enrolled, put in the service and the service is recorded in the MIS, which measures that the local area is going to be responsible for. We talk about whether or not it counts towards the minimum training expenditure requirement, which, because these are adult staff assisted basic and individualized career services, they will not count. We talk about whether it's a same day service, and that way you'll know, okay, this service is only going to show up once in my services listing screen, but there will be multiple episodes every time I provide the service for people to go and look into. And then the last column is the triggers participation extends 90-day exit window. So this lets you know if this service is entered into the system that is going to prolong that 90 days without a service, it's a new service. And so it resets that 90-day clock. So I think that's about it for that demo. Unless you wanted to talk about something else there, Paula.
I don't. I think you got that covered for us.
Okay. And then I think next is yours with the talking about basic career services.
That said, correct. So like Mark mentioned and Laura mentioned, we're going to start out today taking it slow and just get everyone familiar with the services matrix, as well as introduce you to some newer categories in the matrix. The first of which is part of your career services. And we're pretty much all familiar with these services, but they're really clearly laid out within this first tab on the 1A, 1D matrix. And they're called basic career staff assisted. Common theme, these basic career, you're going to see the staff assisted in caps after each label. And we'll explain that. But what these are is their own category, are services that may prompt enrollment of your individual in WIOA, and they're provided with significant staff assisted. The general theme or concept of these basic career staff assisted is that generally they involve a little less time of your staff, a WIOA staff member. They could be activities and time spent with a person to determine eligibility, initial skill assessments, thinking first bits of information you're discovering, first steps, labor exchange services. So there's provision of information, you're giving them information on programs and services and even possible program referrals. But these are participant level services. So the types of thing you're doing here, they're involved, they need your assistance, and it's beyond information only. You might not be handing them over information or showing them a website, but actually helping them interpret the information, and they go beyond self-service only. So there are 6 of them. Within the matrix, you will find only 6 of this category, 6 basic career staff assisted. Like I said, all the labels are clearly named with staff assisted. The columns that Laura was mentioning a second ago and all of the rules for these staff assisted basic career, all of the rules are the same for your columns. They're all going to be a same day service, open and closed on the same day. They're all enrollment services. At the level that your participant, your individual is receiving these, they're a participant. Provision of one of these services, when you have done this and it occurred and was carried out with your participant, they are a WIOA participant. With that said, they all have a tie, a direct relationship to WIOA performance measures. Since these are enrollment services, they trigger participation, and immediately your participants will count in employment measures. The employment rate second quarter after exit, the fourth quarter after exit, and the medians in the second quarter after exit. And that is the column we called WIOA performance that Laura explains. So there's a big note with these, and I want to point it out before we move on. There is no required sequence or order for providing these career services. Yes, they're basic staff assisted. Some of the nature of the definition would lead you to think they may be done first with an individual. Their initial questions and things you're doing first, but there are no rules in policy or in the reporting system that would force you or make you do one of these first or record it first in a system. Just want to point that out. So now that we've made you aware of this category of 6 basic career staff assisted services, we'll go through them quickly. The first on the matrix is initial assessment of skill levels and other needs, staff assisted. This label and definition are new. At the end of the month, when we make the change in the system, this first service, initial assessment, will be new in your drop down for adult and dislocated workers. That doesn't mean anything. You have it in the matrix, you have it in the definition. Now it's available in the system. I just want to point that out because it's something you will see a little bit different that day. It used to be called asset development, and I would bet that most of you never chose that. The second one is called job search activities and assistance, staff assisted. Referred to employment, placement assistance, that's staff assisted. Career counseling guidance service, staff assisted. This also is a new label and definition. So it's a new label that you will see in the drop down. And a little bit later on, Laura is going to thoroughly explain the label and the definitions and exactly what these mean as part of your basic career services that you can provide. This used to be called individual job development. And fifth is UI filing information, staff assisted. That's been available a long time. And then we have the assistance establishing eligibility for financial aid is our sixth. And that has been in all of your menus up until now. Nothing's changing there. And so at this point, I'm just going to take a second to go back to the matrix. Like Mark said, we're just trying to get familiar now. So if we pull it up a lot, we're just going to try to give examples going through, because you're going to have this document in your hands and we want everyone to kind of know their way around it. So Laura pointed out all these columns. I'll quickly give a quick illustration of one way you might be able to apply it when you know that you did an eligibility activity or some other assistance, in-depth resume writing or something like this. You're kind of wandering, you're looking at all this new category we're telling you about. Of course, you'll be reading all the definitions, but if you ever do have a question in an Excel document, you could actually do a search. Is what's one nice thing about this tool. This matrix tool is a reference document, and often you can do a find next and, oh, I just did a resume. Well, the job search activities and assistance basic staff is a service that would be allowable and appropriate for me to document, so I get credit that I just did that with my participants. And up until now, where we have this clear, transparent document, I think it just is going to make it really easy for you to identify all these hundreds of activities and work and little things you do constantly, and all the extra work and steps you're taking, because it's so clear here, you can find out what you're doing. So with that said, I'm going back to our PowerPoint. You'll quickly realize this screen means that we're going to show the matrix in real life, the document itself. So with that said, all my discussion about these 6 basic career staff assisted services. What if you're doing 3 of them in the same day, which is likely? Yes, can I have my client in multiple open services? Well, these are same-day services, so of course you'd want to indicate these and get credit for them. But for example, if your client is also in an occupational training that's going to take them 6 months, absolutely you want to have them in their open training, as well as you're documenting all of their other allowable services at the same time. So the answer is yes, definitely. Career planners must document every allowable service provided to a client in their system. And it serves to just get the whole picture, everything you did with this person that's getting them through the program. So with that said, we want to highlight one of the basic career services that's staff assisted. And I want to go back to one of the rules that Laura pointed out, is that we should not just be putting allowable services under one big umbrella of a career planning service. While you can add episodes to that and document all of these other activities in case notes, moving forward, that is not what we should be doing, because you're definitely doing career planning. But maybe, for example, you have been working with an employer, you know exactly what your participant has done with their training and work experience, and so you have a perfect placement for them. You're not calling them and asking them if they are working. You're actively assisting them and referring them to placement. So you would go in and document this basic career service as its own allowable activity alongside a career planning, possibly alongside an open work experience or something like that. So it should be documented when you played a direct role in placing your participant in employment. And Like I said, you may have a relationship with an employer leading to this placement. If it wasn't for you and your work with the employer, this might not have happened. And you're also taking credit for your active involvement with this employment outcome. So that's just an example of that service to make everyone aware. You've got the whole list in this matrix. So with that being said, I would like to hand it back over to Laura to talk about the next category of career.
Before I go into individualized career services, were there any questions in the chat about basic career services, staff assisted?
Hi, Laura. No, there are not any questions at this time.
Okay, thanks, Mark. All right, well then I'll go ahead and get started on the individualized career services. If you think of a question, make sure to put it in the chat and we'll address it later on in the presentation. So individualized career services must be provided to participants after American Job Center staff or WIOA staff determine that such services are required to either retain or obtain employment. And that's consistent with any applicable statutory priorities, because each of the titles of staff within the AJC have different statutory priorities. Generally, these services involve significant staff time and they are customized to each individual's need. And that's what we want to talk about. The individualized career services require significant staff involvement and focus on specific plans, strategies, and services that have been developed and evolved from the basic career explorations. So even though there's not a requirement to have the basic career services, when they begin doing this, that will assist you in developing and using these individualized career services. And those services, well, these services here for the individualized career services will help focus on the participant engagement and require active participation in activities and or training to ensure that that participant succeeds in meeting their goals. And those goals are going to be outlined in their individual employment plan. And that's going to maximize your performance and your successful long-term career and employment outcomes for your participants. So the specialized assessments and the career counseling and some of the other individualized career services are really, although there's no sequence of services, these services need to be done because they will assist you with developing the individual employment plan. And those are covered in great detail in the career planning policy. So if you're not familiar with that policy, we suggest that you review that and see what how this is to be developed, how the individual employment plan is to be developed, and how these other services assist in that development. And just as we were talking about, all these services must be identified in the individual employment plan. And so some of the individualized career services are same-day services and some are not, but all are enrollment services. So make sure that you know that all are enrollment services. Some are same day, some are cannot be left open or may be left open, and we show that on the same day services column. There are 9 individualized career services. 5 of those are work-based learning opportunities, and so we'll talk about that when we go further into that. And there's also the column that provides the relationship to the WIOA performance. And for individualized career services, for all career services, those are strictly the employment measures, which is the employment rate second and fourth quarter after exit, and the median earnings second quarter after exit. All right, so what are the available WIOA individualized career services for adult to dislocated workers? Well, we have them listed here on this slide. As I said before, there's 9 services, and you can see that there are 5 identified work-based learning opportunities that are sub-indented here. None of the individualized career services are new services. They've all been here before. And they were in your menu of available services before that. So here is, we're going to try to do a demo here. Thanks, Paula. This tab further down, further down on this tab for individualized career services is another dark blue header row further up that shows the where it breaks off the basic career services and the individualized career services. So everything below that is basic, everything below this is individualized career services. There is a definition here that's an easy reference. And then we go into the several different types of services, the comprehensive and specialized assessments that have to be done to develop the IEP. The development of the IEP is a individualized career service and has to end listed here. And here's the definition. Again, it's a same-day service. Career planning, case management. This kind of used to be a catch-all, but we want to make sure that people understand that if you do services listed here, that they must be put in as a separate service and not just put in career planning and case notes, because case notes, you have to really dig through the case notes, and we need to be able to provide anyone looking at this, whether it's federal monitors, state monitors, or legislators, a clear picture of what's going on with our program. And so it's a lot easier to do that by showing those services instead of trying to put those types of things in case notes. Short-term pre-vocational services or job readiness. That's part of the short-term vocational data element under the PEARL. And we've got two services here under that. We've got the short-term pre-vocational services, and we've also got the group workshop or group workforce research workshops and job clubs. So we have an actual service where you can record those job clubs and workshops. Then we have internships, and here are the internships, and we do have the 5 types of work-based learning opportunities underneath the internship. We have paid and unpaid work experience. We have pre-apprenticeship. We have job shadowing, and then last but not least, we have transitional jobs. Transitional jobs are going to be incorporated into the work experience policy, and that will be coming out very soon. And so you can refer to that policy if the local area wants to do transitional jobs, or you have participants that would really fit into this particular category. Again, this one is not a none of the work experiences are a same-day service because it's an ongoing learning opportunity. So I wanted to point that out. Yes, and transitional jobs do count towards the minimum training expenditure requirement. Workforce preparation activities are outlined here. Workforce preparation is aligned with the definition for adult education, which is in WIOA section 203.17. And so we wanted to make sure that everyone was aware what those were. Sorry, Paula.
I'm sorry.
Okay, and I think there's a couple left. Oh yeah, financial literacy services. Those are also outlined in the final rules and defined here. And then out of area job search and relocation assistance, which we're absolutely allowed to do, and make sure that we put that there. That is a same-day service, and it does extend the exit window. So if you are providing out of area job search, that does extend the exit date. And then the last is the English language acquisition. And this is the Title II Adult Education's Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Program. And so we want to make sure that we put that there. There is another program. So if that program is includes a training component, then it would fall under our training tab. But for right now, this is strictly English language education or English language acquisition with some workforce preparation skills in there. So, and it does count towards the MTE. So. And it is not a same-day service since it is a course. Down here at the bottom of the tab, because I don't think we necessarily cover that in other slides, but we wanted to make sure that we pointed out that the performance measures, there's an asterisk on that tab. And if you come down here, you can see that what the column identifies the relationship of those services. And then there's just some regular guidelines that all participants are included in the denominator for the employment rate second and fourth quarter after exit. All exiters employed in the second quarter post-exit will be included in the denominator of the median's earning measure. Enrolling in specific training programs or OJT determines when a participant's included in the credential or the MSG measure, and we'll talk about that later when we get to the training section. And individualized career services provided alone will not trigger inclusion in the credential attainment rate or measurable skill gains indicators, because those are there's no expectation that there be a credential obtained. And then for the performance measures, we to help make the column a little bit easier to read, we have a legend down here to tell you exactly what each of the acronyms stands for, whether it's adult and dislocated worker employment, or whether it's the credentialer or measurable skill gains measure. And then the last item on this tab is to say that supportive services that are necessary to enable an individual to successfully participate in career and training services can get supportive services. And so we direct individuals that are reviewing this matrix to the supportive services tab. And we'll talk about supportive services later on in this group of presentations this week. But it's just a reminder that if that's needed, that supportive services are allowed. Now, one last thing I want to talk about before we go to the next slide is that you may think that some of those services, they sounded familiar. Oh, you can go back to the slide, Paula. You may think that some of those services sounded similar to some of the basic career services that Paula kind of discussed earlier. And we're going to highlight those differences between those services in the next several slides. So a quick question: what is the difference between an initial assessment of skills levels and other needs, staff assisted, and the comprehensive and specialized assessment service? And the question or the answer to that is that the initial assessment of skills levels and other needs is a staff assisted basic career service, and it is a cursory assessment. And the comprehensive and specialized assessment is an individualized career service, and it's more staff involved comprehensive assessment. And so now we're going to look at a side-by-side of the two services. So the basic career staff assisted, the initial assessment of skills levels and other needs, is done during intake, and it determines a customer's interest, skills, and needs. This initial assessment provides preliminary information about the individual's skills levels, aptitudes, abilities, and supportive services needs. During this service, the WIOA staff have brief initial discovery and conversations with the participant, and they complete the gathering of information related to eligibility. It is a starting point and engagement with the individual that leads to enrollment and future assessments. This service is how staff document that first basic interaction. And staff should know that even though this basic career service is done prior to certification in the MIS, they must record that they did this service after certification of the application and case note when and how they did it. And again, you have 10 days to enter services into the system. And so you may very well do this initial assessment, and then the next day complete the certification. And then by the third day, you're putting this service into the system and putting that documentation in. The individualized career service, or the comprehensive and specialized assessments, is done after enrollment. And these build off the information gathered at intake and assists with informing the IEP development. These assessments and analysis are more in-depth learning about the participant's abilities and skills through interviewing and testing. It is an ongoing process and assists in modifying the IEP throughout participation. As with the assessment during intake, career planners must address informed customer choice when determining suitability for any services in a particular or training in a particular career pathway. And these services are further defined in the assessment section of the career planning policy. So you can go there to get a little bit of more information. So next, we're going to do a service highlight. We're going to talk about one of the services, one of the individualized career services. And this is an application slide. So we're going to tell you how to apply this in real life. And the rules for reporting, not all WIOA adults will receive all career services, but all of them must have an individual employment plan developed for them. It is a same-day service, and therefore one service record is entered into the MIS, and then additional episodes are added when the IEP is reviewed as required throughout participation. Like the assessment, the IEP is a living document and identifies employment and education goals as part of a career pathway, objectives, and the appropriate combination of services that the participant needs to reach those goals. It is to be developed collaboratively between the career planner and the participant with mutually established goals. You don't want to work with your participant and have them have pie in the sky goals and not be able to meet those. So it has to be a mutually established goals. The IEP must be developed after an objective assessment and reflect the expressed interests and needs of the participants. The services matrix becomes an important tool since it lists all of the allowable services available to the participant if needed to reach their goals. And so WIOA staff must establish an IEP with at least one open goal, with at least one open objective. And once developed, it has to be signed by the participant and properly documented in the MIS. So to learn more about the individual employment plan service, please see the individual employment plan and individual service strategy section of the career planning policy, because it gives you a lot more in-depth information about developing the IEP and about the establishing the goals and objectives. All right, so we have another one. What do you think is the difference between career counseling and guidance, which is staff assisted basic career service, and career planning case management service? Well, I kind of said that. So the career counseling and guidance is a staff assisted basic career service in which the staff has general discussions with the customers about careers. Career planning and case management is an individualized career service, and it encompasses more staff-involved, day-to-day conversations, one-on-one, in-depth counseling. So we're going to look at the next slide because that's going to give us a little bit of a side-by-side of these two services. So the basic career staff-assisted career counseling and guidance goes beyond information only. Information only would make it a basic career service that is not an enrolling service. But we're talking about beyond information only, when there is staff involvement and the staff provides more information on careers that helps an individual understand and apply the information, and that the informed choices are made versus just providing someone with a website to go explore on their own. Examples are working with the individual to review the ETPL and the demand occupations list, or other WIOA services that may be of their interest. This is where the staff starts conversations to begin assessing needs and other options that help the individual to achieve their employment goals by providing details about programs that an individual would not learn about otherwise without the staff's assistance. And this helps decide the next steps in future planning. So this is mainly towards exploring those careers. It's career counseling and guidance. The individualized career service, the career planning case management, is again beyond information, but it is the day-to-day career planning based on one-on-one in-depth counseling. And it discusses the next steps to be taken to reach their goals. It encompasses the individual discovery and analysis of personal needs, such as supportive services, and the conversations about the strategic next steps and identification of programs and service enrollments, all of which help to prepare and coordinate the employment plan. It is used to record instances where working with employers or training program providers on the behalf of their participant are documented. And again, if you refer to the career planning policy, there is further guidance on career planning and case management. So make sure that you review that policy. That might help a little bit for distinguishing these services as well. So another application, I'm working with an IEP client, or with an IEP with my client. The definition for short-term pre-vocational services, job readiness, and workforce preparation activities look like they provide some of the same activities or impart similar skills. They just graduated from nursing school, and we are assisting them in studying for exams for their license. Is either of these services appropriate to provide? And the answer is yes. And it would be the short-term pre-vocational services job readiness service. So we're going to kind of highlight the difference between these two services as well. Short-term pre-vocational services or job readiness is for individuals who lack the occupational credentials and certifications and require short-term services to enhance or upgrade their skills for employment, and may include services that prepare individuals for licensing or certification exams. And they enhance the employability of individuals who already possess occupational skills in demand, but they lack up-to-date skills required in most workplaces hiring for the occupation. This is where you would record the services, the pre-training services that are required for general courses for general employment, such as OSHA 10 trainings, CPR first aid classes, Surf Safe for food safety courses, basic computer classes, and any other short-term courses that do not end in a credential. So basically, these are providing short-term services to get the individual ready for their job. The workforce preparation activities is basically knowledge, skills, and competencies that prepare individuals to obtain or retain employment or to advance in the workplace. So basically, these are soft skills. The skills acquired through workforce preparation are not career or industry-specific skills. These workforce preparation activities, this definition aligns with the adult education definition of workforce preparation activities under Title II of WIOA. And this also follows the Illinois Essential Employability Skills, and that's those general skills that are required to be successful in all sectors of the labor market and are separate from the technical skills attained in career pathways or academic skills, such as math and reading. So it is not, so it's basically the soft skills to prepare an individual to enter into the workforce. All right, so I believe that that is the end of the individualized career services. So Mark, what kind of questions do we have?
Yeah, great. Thanks everyone for putting your questions in the chat. The first one is, should a career planner open both an initial and a comprehensive assessment for a client interested in training, and it be part of developing the IEP?
Yes, the initial assessment is a basic career service that is that has to be done, and the comprehensive assessment, it has to be done as well. The initial is pretty much done prior to enrollment, so you would open that up after the individual is certified. It's about collecting that initial information to know whether or not that individual is a good fit for WIOA services, and that is going to be open. These are same-day services, so they wouldn't be necessarily open at the same time because same-day services have a begin and end date on that same date. But yes, you would expect to see both of those services in the services listing on that screen.
Great. Hopefully, LaDonna, that answered your question. I think to add to that, I think each individual is going to have its own decision to be made, and certainly with training services, you're going to want to make sure that you've done the assessment necessary to identify the appropriate training, to identify that they're suitable for the training, and all of that. So it certainly would be difficult to enroll someone in training, decide on a decision to go into training without having done those assessments. Another question, would helping a customer study for their driver's license test fall under the short-term pre-vocational or workforce preparation activities category?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure on that. I'm sure that we can go back and look and make sure that we record that in the right place. Those are the questions to ask. I know that short-term pre-vocational services are really meant to be, preparing for those licenses and exams, including the NCLEX, which is the next question. It can help. That's where you would record helping preparation for the NCLEX exam under short-term pre-vocational services. So I'm thinking that would probably fall under there. I know that is something that we are looking at for documentation towards eligibility, as if the individual doesn't have some of the required documents, that the career planner can take self-attestation for certain things, and then they can go back and work with the customer in order to obtain those things. So yes, that's definitely an option. And Kirsten,
Kirsten, Kirsten, can you expel Mirage? He's found his way back. He, she, haven't seen him in a while. So
whatever bot that is, yeah.
Yeah. They got some good questions sometimes in comments that are relative to workforce. So it's interesting when we get those. One of the things I was thinking when I saw that question, Cassandra and everyone else, was that when we look at short-term pre-vocational workforce, it's kind of the significance is that they're not specific to your career or industry. But I guess your question, if I'm going into, let's say, CDL driving, maybe I could infer that it is related to my career and industry. So maybe you find a different place for that type of training. But I think the preparation still probably falls here. And I only mention that because one of the things we've talked about in our webinars, both performance and our overview the other day, is we're trying to provide all of you the skills to make these decisions. Hopefully we've given you the information in the matrix. We're giving you decision-making process, kind of procedural methodology of how we go about making a decision here within OET. And sometimes you're going to have gray areas. So I think if you are looking at this with all the information you have in front of you and can make an appropriate decision based on that, more than likely you probably are right. And in some instances there might be two different decisions. But if it's a gray area and you just simply cannot commit to a response, that's when you can reach out to Paul or Laura, myself. But I hope that through this series of webinars, and once you see the matrix, you can make some of those decisions on your own and not need our assistance necessarily. We'll move on to another question. What about an NCLEX, which I'm unfortunately not familiar with, exam preparation? Where would that fall? Would that fall under one of these categories?
Yes, the NCLEX would fall underneath the short-term pre-vocational services job readiness, because it's helping them prepare for that exam.
Great. And then another one, and this was one I was thinking of, Laura. When you talk about goals and objectives as you develop the IEP, can you differentiate between what a goal is and what an objective is?
I would have to pull up I can do that. Give me 2 seconds. The career planning policy outlines how to develop an effective IEP and individual service strategy for youth. And it goes through and it talks about the different types of things that you should do. I'm pulling it up right now. You won't see it on your screen, but I have it in front of me in order to respond to your questions. And it is section 4.2.5 of the e-policy manual. So it's under chapter 4.2 is the career planning policy chapter. And the IEP and ISS are outlined here. And it talks about goals and objectives. And they should be written with a smarter objective where they're specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-driven, ability to evaluate them, and then to reflect and adjust on them as they go. The goals and objectives that are out here, the goals are basically your short term, your training and employment goals. Are you wanting to go into, I mean, and it's pretty much that simple. Is it a training goal or is it an employment goal? What is the goal of getting them through this program? It's one of those, whether it's a youth, it may be education, but for an adult or dislocated worker, it's probably training or employment is going to be your goal for your short term. And then you're going to have long-term goals that talk about maybe they're wanting to go through, maybe this is part of a career pathway to obtain their career objectives. So you're going to outline their goals are going to outline the different parts of how they're going to go up through that career pathway. And so the objectives are what the individual is going to do in order to reach that goal. So your objectives are going to be services. They're going to be you checking up on them and putting specific measurements in there, using those smarter techniques, talking about when it's expected to be attained, when, how you're going to measure it, how you're going to check in with them, when you think they should be done with that, when you're going to look at it and evaluate. And then when you're going to make sure after you evaluate that objective, if they're not on par for meeting that, then you're going to have to adjust that IEP. So that's the difference between the goals and the objectives. The objectives are how you're going to reach those goals. And the goals are the employment goals or the training goals for adults and dislocated workers.
Excellent, thank you. And that's where Laura has really been very helpful through this process, developing the matrix, and that is there's such a strong connection between the services that are available and that career planning policy as one of the examples of policy that it really closely ties to, that we just need her input from there to make sure we're providing you all the resources necessary. That was the last question in the chat. We will open up the phone lines at the end of today, near the end, if you'd rather wait and ask your question verbally, but please keep the questions coming as we continue here in the chat pod, and we'll continue to respond to them. And then Paula, when you go to that last demo today and pull up the matrix again, can you zoom in on it just so they can kind of see a little bit more of the wording? It's a little bit small on computer screen, so maybe just zoom into a couple areas when we get into that work-based learning demo. Thank you.
Yes, I will. Thank you. I saw that and I was like, I can't tell, but thanks. Okay, so with that said, on the individualized career services and those comparisons, I'm going to bring up another rule that applies to all of our career services, almost all of our career services that Laura mentioned up front. And it's the rules that apply to when we define something as a same-day service. And as Laura mentioned, it's a same-day service because it's usually done in one day, meaning it can't be left open. It's not provided over 3 weeks. The one time you do it, it will extend participation for 90 days, but you can't treat it like a short-term pre-voc service that could go for a couple weeks and keep extending participation. So along with the same-day service is one part of the record that's real specific to a same-day service record when you're literally in the system adding it, is that an additional episode, an episode or iteration of that same service must be done with this same-day service. A case note is required, and our system will literally set the date to today's date. You can't leave it open. the contact date, we can always see when you actually made the contact date, but the date you're adding it needs to be the same day. So without getting too technical, there's a big question that comes up is, okay, you got it. You're required to enter a case note with an episode of a service, and this is a real service that extends participation. Then there are case notes that can be added, and we call those general case notes or standard case notes, and all you're doing there is adding a case note. You are not going into a service record, you're not going into their list of services or anything. So what is the difference? So to demonstrate this, we have a question for you. If a participant contacts me via a phone message or email to inform me of their progress with their training, their WIOA training, should I enter this as a general case note, or should I add it under an episode to the career planning or IEP service record? So should I just do a case note alone, or actually go in and tie it to career planning or an IEP or any other one of the individualized career services or other that it goes along with? So to determine this, we have a couple key points. So we need to determine exactly what you did to consider which way to do it. Was it a real service that justifies them staying in the program for 90 more days, and that's an episode? Or was it other? Just like Mark said, we're just trying to provide some context to be able to make these determinations when we run into something that seems a little gray. So here are the key factors to always consider when you're trying to, determine episode or a general case note. An episode attached to an actual service should always be added when you're using the information to determine a course of action or next step. Like when the participant is saying, oh, look, I got this note from my employer and it's great and it's this excellent progress report. Oh, well, that tells me that you got an MSG. You're progressing through this. And this makes it a career planning service because you're going to have to go act on this in the system. You provided them a service, and they're going to remain in the program for 90 more days. If it's a career planning service, it could fall under any of these career services. And so you can always go back to your matrix and find activities that you did that justify an episode. So when you just do the general case note, you're not touching a service. So it's when you haven't even really gotten to the level of communication. It might be two-way. You could have spoke to them directly, emailed back and forth, but it's information only. Like when they call you, it's a very brief conversation, not a lot of discovery or provoking a lot of needs from them. It's a conversation. Maybe they just verify employment. Everything's going great. Thank you. I'm still working here. And they indicate, I don't need anything else from the program, but you're just following up with them. So you are not providing a service. That's again, a general case note. And once you've gotten to that point, you should probably be looking at these individual cases for exit, because like I said, you're not extending participation at all. Nothing's occurred that justifies their continued participation in the program. So this has been, Jim Potts has great training on this. So do monitors. We just wanted to point this out because it's so inherent and essential to all of these services. So with that said, I think I covered this already. A little side by side, if you ever are in doubt, just kind of ask yourself these questions when you want to do an episode versus a case note. Episode, yes. If you're providing a level of assistance that if that individual participant didn't have you, they might not be as successful. They're really productive efforts on your part that result in actionable steps, updating IEPs, maybe enrolling in a service that you never thought of until you figured out this information one day. Oh, this work experience, this work-based learning is good for them. You figure that out. That's an episode. And you should always go back to the matrix and attach it to the most relatable and relevant one of those career services. Like we said, these shouldn't always be rolled up under your career planning. When there's a real specific service label that you can report in addition to your career planning, it's just leaving a better track and path and story for these participants when you add these this way. So then when the staff goes ahead and they're telling you, I do need additional assistance, I'm not ready to leave the program, you can still help me here. And always keep in mind, an episode is a service. So when you've added that, that's going to align with the exit date. If nothing else was done, that episode will be their exit date. So again, one more time, if we add a case, when should I add a case note only? Only if you're doing brief updates, confirming employment, or verifying things like that. Nothing you did is actionable. Nothing else really needs to be updated for them in the system. Perhaps possibly exit. They didn't ask for anything else. They don't want anything else. And of course, these general case notes are only ever going to be a case note in the system. Out there is a case note, and the date you do it will never be their exit date because it's not a service. And when we say general and standard case notes, it's the same thing. It's referring to just a case note that's not an episode. It's actually entered by going to a different section in the system. So it's real clear also, as I'm sure you're all aware, when you're in a same-day service record, the system makes you do it. You can't even get out of it without adding a case note. So with that said, I will hand it over to Laura to go over work-based learning initially. I think we have enough time, Laura.
Yes, we do have enough time. Real quick, though, I want to answer one of the questions in the chat about providing ideas of what an episode would be for an IEP. And so in the career planning policy, it talks about a little bit about the IEP and when it would need to be reviewed. So for instance, an individual car breaks down, and now all of a sudden they're halfway through training and they need a supportive service for transportation. You have to go in that IEP and alter that IEP to document there is a need and that you're going to provide that supportive service. There is also a requirement that the IEP be reviewed every quarter, at least once every 90 days, unless it is updated sooner as a result of the regular 30-day contact that you should be having with your customers. And that episode will be determined kind of on, like what Paula was saying, during that contact, was it determined that they need an additional service because they're lagging behind their objectives, or does that individual is doing great, and all of a sudden we don't think that they're going to need this other service that we had planned for them because it looks like they're going to graduate with flying colors and they've already got a job offer. So that's the types of things that would constitute and adding a new episode to the IEP, is to go in and when you're altering that IEP, is you would go in and put an episode and put that in the case notes. So
Thanks, Laura.
Answer that.
I see a question from Irene, and I think a follow-up from Damar. If I could try to answer these quickly.
Sure.
So there's difference between when an occupational skills training record is open and if there isn't one, when to document career services that are same day. So if in fact you have someone in an occupational skills training, that record is staying open. What we're trying to say is that just because that's extending their participation alone, you don't need a career service to justify participation. It is preferable to go in alongside the open training program and still document all those individual career services you're providing, whether it's one, whether it's multiple episodes or iterations under a certain activity. So yes, you should, even if you have the occupational skills training open, you should still document everything else that's being done alongside that if necessary. Is that, I think I understood the question. And then, yes, if they're in an occupational skills training record and that remains open, you would go in, and whenever they provide you something from the occupational skills training, if the progress report or transcripts that you will be using to justify documenting an MSG for that, that would be documented under a career planning service. Would you agree, Laura?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes. So 2 different things there. Document everything alongside an open record as well as for MSG.
Okay, I don't see any more questions in the chat, and it looks like that we've covered that. We are going to cover training services in more depth or completely in Thursday's webinar. So we can talk more about those services then. To finish up today, we're going to talk about work-based learning. Work-based learning, as we talked about, for adults and dislocated workers is an individualized career service. And this is where they can earn and learn, which is the favorite thing here. Work-based learnings are categorized as individualized career services and not training services. And they also here we have listed is the performance, or not on this tab, we don't have the performance measures, but Stephanie Green of OET is our new work-based learning coordinator. And so she might be hearing her name in the future. So make sure that if you have any questions on that, you contact her. And we're gonna, if you go to the next slide and we go into the demo, then we can just kind of show this right off the bat. Okay, there we go. Pretty. Thank you, Paula. Now we can read it. This work-based learning tab is strictly a reference. And if you notice, it includes all 3 different programs. It encompasses the adult, dislocated worker, and youth. So employment opportunities, including internships not limited to summer months, is work experience. And therefore, it is allowable in adult, dislocated worker, and youth. And it tells which of the types of services that should be selected, whether it's paid or unpaid. Then we have pre-apprenticeship programs where we list the programs that are allowed to have it, job shadowing, on-the-job training. We make sure to put the caveat here for on-the-job training, because for adults and dislocated workers, it is a individualized career service, but for for adults and dislocated workers, it's training, but for youth, it's part of the work experience requirement. So there is a difference here. So we do have a special on-the-job training service that's specifically for youth only. So that way we can make sure that those individuals are getting in the right performance measures. And then we also have 4 transitional jobs. Those are not available for youth, but those are available for adults, dislocated workers, and those under a dislocated worker, a national dislocated worker grant. So, and it shows the label activity in the MIS of what you would select. Now, this is the only thing that's on this tab. It is basically a reference tab, just so you can go in and make sure and get a feel at a glance what all of the potential work-based learning is. We also have incentives here, but that's youth only, and we'll talk about that during our youth session. Same for these 2 notes down there. Those are youth, and we'll highlight those in the youth session. But we wanted to make sure that everyone knew that if sometimes we know in the field that there's a separate individual that works with employers and businesses in order to create these work-based learning opportunities. And this would be a good just cheat sheet for them to use to see what all is allowable and what is not allowable. Now, when you go back to the individualized tab and you look for those work-based learning opportunities, that's where it gets into the detail and tells you where they fall. that the paid and unpaid work experience, and it tells you what measures they fall under and whether or not they are a same-day service and whether or not they extend participation. So all of the information as far as the definitions for youth and the definitions for adult and dislocated workers can be found in those individual tabs, because it is slightly different for youth than adults and dislocated workers, and it's better to have you go to the appropriate tab to see the correct definition rather than include those definitions on the work-based learning tab. So just wanted to point that out to everyone, that that's kind of how we have that set up and why we did it that way. Again, we want to make sure that you have this list of services here in front of you, so you know what services are available for your customers to hit those employment or training goals established in their IEP. And so this is all of the staff assisted career services and individualized career services that are applicable to the adult and dislocated worker program. And next time on Thursday, we are going to have we're going to continue this and pick up and go further on, going through the training services and the supportive services and the follow-up, as well as the disaster recovery DRE. That will be the second session on Thursday. So make sure you tune in for that one. And Mark, I will turn it back over to you.
All right. Thank you, Paula and Laura. Excellent information. We've responded to all the questions in the chat. I'll give anyone a moment if they want to open up their phone line to ask any final questions. As you're doing that with your phone line, if you raise your hand so I can go down the list and see if you actually do want to speak. I'm going to go through the next couple slides briefly to let you know where we're at. Nope. Keep going. Yep. Back. Yeah. Right here. Yeah. Thanks, Paula. So we talked about this last Thursday. If you have any questions after today's session, and as we continue through this journey of sharing the matrix, deploying the changes in the systems into the middle of March, please contact your supervisor to find out who you should be submitting your question to. We've asked that one individual be identified in each local area to actually submit those so that they can be looked through, get rid of any repetition, or maybe do a better job of making the question a little bit more general in nature in case you put any personal identifiable information in your question to your contact, and then that contact will submit those on through the FAQ page. We will update that page eventually once we get enough questions and answers to share with all of you. Those questions and answers will come from these sessions, and also will come from, don't forget, we talked about last week that starting tomorrow, we will have an open question and answer segment or session beginning at 1 o'clock. Now, tomorrow's is a little bit different in that it's part of our quarterly performance office hours. So even though we're starting at 1, we probably will not get to the Q&A session until maybe 1:30. But if you're able to join us, you can submit your questions there as well. You'll be able to voice them there, or we'll be bringing in any of the questions we receive through our website FAQ submissions. And so, again, please be mindful of going through your contact. We've got about half of those. So if you're a Title I director and haven't contacted me yet with that individual, so we can monitor who's submitting those and we can contact them if we have questions to clarify anything they've submitted, please let me know in the next couple of days who your contact is. We would appreciate that. And then after tomorrow at 1 o'clock for the next 6 or 7 Wednesdays, we'll continue to have those open Q&A sessions for anyone to join us and either submit a question, listen to what questions have already been submitted, or just hear, kind of a recap of what we've occurred. Now, we do ask that any questions submitted are in reference to what we've already covered. So we're only on the 1A, 1D sessions right now, so we don't want you to go beyond that and start asking questions for youth. We'll hold those back. We won't share those in the next couple of open sessions, simply because we haven't shared that information. We might be able to respond to them in the webinars themselves. Next slide, please. Paula. Okay, here's kind of a rundown of where we've got to go still. So today we've provided the first session, and we didn't get to training sessions services today, but we'll get to those along with the support and follow-up services on Thursday, which will close out the adult and dislocated worker set of services. And then in a couple weeks, we will touch base with all of you on all of the youth services, all 14 program elements. We'll separate those into a couple different sessions as well. Here, you can also, if you've got some staff that haven't been able to join us, maybe they're not getting our automated emails, make sure they're registering to receive those so that they can, they're on the listserv so they can register for all these upcoming sessions. And then finally, we talked about recording these sessions. You can access the recording as well as the PowerPoints in that Illinois WorkNet videos and training material site. Those links on your PowerPoint that you received today, you'll also get that in an email. And then finally, that last session, we're still putting on hold. We're going to see if we need a March 21 recap session. If we have a lot of continued questions that we aren't able to respond to in our Wednesday open office hours, we might schedule that March 21st session. So we really appreciate everyone joining us today. I don't see any hands raised. So I don't think we have any more questions. We look forward to you joining us on Thursday. Again, it'll be for the all the LWIAs except for LWIA 7. So please come back and hear the rest of those services. Thank you very much. And goodbye.
Really quickly, Mark.
Thank you, and thank you.
Thank you. And really quickly, Mark, I'm just going to put the link in the chat for those sessions. People can also click the links in your slide deck as well to register for tomorrow, for the link for tomorrow's office hours, and then register for Thursday as well.
That would be great.
And that's in the chat now. Thank you so much, everyone.